Welcome to the Dennis Report. I'm Dennis Atchison. The theme of political leadership is key to a lot of the decision-making that goes on for a province. We have many issues coming at us. Things have changed. People are more engaged. The impact of social media is so significant. And we want to know what a real solution is, instead of a temporary solution that only got us this far for a 4-year window or a 2-year window. Today's guest is going to offer up his vision for how New Brunswick can actually move forward through political change and political leadership. So our guest today is Brian Macdonald, MLA for Fredericton West, Hanwell.
That's right.
I got it right.
You got it.
Welcome.
Thanks, Dennis. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate your world's busy.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, no, it's a little hectic these days, but it's good.
For the audience who may not know, Brian is also running for the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party of New Brunswick. It's going to be a bit of a horse race. It seems like every other 2 weeks or so, someone else has decided they're going to join in.
Yeah, I was proud to be the first to enter and the first certified candidate and the first to pay my fee.
Yeah.
That's always important. That's the real, I mean, that's where really where the rubber meets the road. But yeah, there are now six declared candidates and there may be more.
Yeah.
So we know it's the event itself, the convention is going to be here in Fredericton on the 22nd of October. Okay. In addition to the Fredericton Convention, there will be satellite locations. I think there's certainly Moncton, St. John, Saint Leonard, Bathurst, and then the three islands, Campbell, Deer, and Grand Manan. Okay. So a number of satellite locations. We may see more. Who knows? That's always possible. But yeah, with 6 candidates and a number of satellite locations, it's a pretty busy race.
Many would say 6 candidates is a good sign. Maybe not from a particular candidate's point of view, but for the party's point of view, it's good to have people wanting to come forward and offer their energy and vision for where it wants to go.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd prefer one candidate, but no, I think it absolutely shows there's a lot of energy in the party. There's a lot of interest, and frankly, I think it's an indicator that the current government is not doing well, because I think that's really what's attracting people, is the reality that there's an opportunity there to change the government and to be a leader of the province. So I think that's what makes it very attractive.
Cool. And from your point of view, what spurs you to go from being an MLA, which already has a pretty hefty workload, to becoming leader of a party? What's driving you? Well,
I'm passionate about our province. I think that we have a great potential here. We have a province that is really rich in resources, both natural resources and human resources. And we have to better use those resources. And I think that one of the great things about New Brunswick is it's small enough to really get things done. And we have the opportunity now to reverse our stride and take this province in a new positive direction that's going to see small and medium-sized businesses grow, that's going to see us take better care of our seniors, that's going to see lower taxation and a balanced budget. I mean, I think we can get to all those places, and I think we can do it with the right leadership. And I'm proud to offer my set of skills, because I come at this with 6 years experience in the legislature, both in government and in opposition now, so I've seen how that system works. Yep. I've worked inside the civil service and inside government at the federal level, so I've seen that. And I have 15 years of international experience as an infantry officer around the world with real-time leadership experience. So I think I've got a good combination of those 3 pieces, the real-time leadership experience inside government and at the federal and provincial level that gives me the skill set that I think the province needs.
So let's explore a little bit on that, because that's a great platform to branch off in 1,000 directions. So for the most part, mainstream media, such as it is in New Brunswick, will portray a negative image all the time, or a dysfunctional image. So this isn't working well, or this is fighting against this. So fracking to the Energy East pipeline, to the storyline or the narrative tends to be for and against. And it might be that it isn't the case. And they'll often do that with politicians. They'll say for and against, and it's usually a little more subtle and a little more complex than that.
You're right.
In order to get at where the real solution lay. So as you enter into a candidate for a leadership role, and coming from a 6 or 7 year political background, what do you see as the biggest challenge, and then therefore where the breakthrough is for a systemic change? Because the province has all kinds of opportunity, has all kinds of skill sets. but we never get that story out. We never get to recognize that in ourselves.
Well, you've got a great personal history in leading engagement, and I think that's got to be part of the solution. I think with the current government, we see a government that's divorced from the people. They're making decisions, and people are looking at those decisions. They don't understand how we got there, and so that process of engagement and frankly of education. Engagement is partly education. That's really important. I was disappointed to see the choices process. We had a strategic program review, but the result of all of that consultation and all that ended up being a tax increase.
There you go.
Which, by the way, we predicted.
You're talking about the last provincial budget.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
The consultation process,
Yeah.
it might not have been a true consultation
That's
process.
right. And so to my mind, we do elect governments and leaders to lead. That's important. So they have to, when you get elected on a platform, which, by the way, HST increase wasn't part of their election platform, but you get elected on a platform and you have a mandate to implement that platform. That's true for sure.
Yeah.
I think that the best way to move the needle and move those decisions along is to have a real consultation process. And I was disappointed because I felt that this process they'd already decided what the outcome would be, and that's not consultation, that's something else.
Yep.
And if it's just an education process, then just call it that. I mean, I think that the people of New Brunswick always need to be educated on what the real problems are, what the real challenges are, and consulted on their solutions. I think that's an ongoing process. It doesn't end. That's why that's one of the reasons the legislature exists.
Yes.
But unfortunately, as you well know, you've had lots of people sit at this table, lots of politicians, and the reality is that the legislature is really not the area where real debate and discussion takes place. So it's kind of an antiquated, the legislature itself is kind of an antiquated model. It's probably good news. I think it is good news that public policy discussion is more democratic than it's ever been.
Yes.
And it's done in person, in some cases. It's also done online, and that's increasing. And I don't know that any government yet has understood how to participate in that part of the public policy debate.
And you're speaking to underpinning that. There's another theme, and this will be fun to go explore, the difference between being in power and governance. Because as society engages more and has the tools in order to connect with each other, even though it can be the most random, off-the-wall conversation, the energy is still there. So I'm thinking of the full range of conversation around fracking.
Yes.
Or the Energies pipeline, or anything around fisheries and salmon cages. Take your pick on topic, or the Sisson mine. There's a kind of conversation that happens in social media, and regardless of its tone at times, you still have to accept that something's going on there.
Yes,
There's a conversation
absolutely.
going on, which then begs to where is the clutch, or where's the engagement, where's the mesh from the political process? Because you have a mandate, you were elected to deliver that mandate. New information could come along 2 years later, and maybe you got to shift and try to explain that to people. And at the same time, they've got to respect that you have the authority to make those changes.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, are you in power or are you in governance? Because power is very different from government. Power will be imposed, and governance, there'll be a different measure. Are we ready for that shift yet? And will political parties shift that, or do they still want to be in power?
Well, I think we're all in our own way following the curve. So you try and be on the front end of it, but I think the reality is we're always adapting to changes that are outside of our control. And not to get too cerebral about it, but I don't think anybody yet understands really how to engage the dialogue that's happening in social media. There's a lot of people that are trying. I think people are doing it to different levels of success. But you're absolutely right. There's no doubt that debate is happening. I think part of the challenge, when I look at what I see on social media, I see a very small group of people who are very engaged. And what's, you talk about sort of democracy. One of the things about democracy is people get what they want, right? And resources should follow that interest. And what you see now is, some people are very engaged in politics, very, very engaged in politics, and they care deeply about it. There's another level of people that are very engaged in sports, and so they are, as technology advances, right on your cell phone, on their Twitter feed, they're getting all the sports updates. Yep. On my Twitter feed, I get all the political stuff. Yep. So I see the world through that lens, and they see the world through a different lens. And let's say if your interest is music or whatever your interest is, technology is now allowing you to pick and choose your interests and receive that information directly. You know, it used to be you turned on the TV and what was ever on was you watched, and then there were more channels and you got to pick your channel. Now, I mean, it's you know, technology is tailored to your interest set.
Yeah.
So the public policy debate that happens on places like Twitter and Facebook is often confined to a very narrow group of people who care very deeply. Now, in the game that I'm in right now, the nomination process, the leadership process, this will engage only thousands of New Brunswickers. There won't be 10,000 people at the convention. There might be 6,000, probably closer to 4,000. Last time there was 4,000. So that's a very small subset of people in New Brunswick that are interested and engaged in politics, let alone on the right end of the spectrum.
Yep.
And I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, social media does focus on a small group of people, really, that are interested in that skill set. What we have to do is engage everybody.
Yep.
And I look at it in my constituency office. You know, our job is to serve the community. But one of the things we do is answer the phone. So the people that call us are the people that get served. But that's a small group. I mean, that could be a couple hundred people a year.
And
there's
you're reacting.
15,000. Yeah, you're reacting. So there's 15,000 people in the community that you're not touching when you're responding to the calls of 500 people. Now, you need to do that, but you also have to find ways of reaching out to those 15,000 people who, by the way, would rather watch the sports game or listen to music or take a knitting class than listen to what you have to say as a politician. But those people are all voters, and they all get upset when you do it wrong. So it is very difficult because if you have a tin ear listening only to social media, which you do have to do, but you can miss the whole point because the bulk of people are not engaging on those platforms. Even though they're on social media, not on the political piece.
You're doing an excellent job mapping out where some of the gaps are in the communication and the relationship exercise, because there has to be a responsibility on the part of voters and citizens as well to, yes, so they're sort of engaging, but they might be engaging somewhat narrow focused based on a passion. But somewhere in there we need to build that new narrative or that new space where people in your role can come with the complete message or a fuller message. And listen for 15 minutes, just sit and listen and hear the intent as well as the detail.
Yeah.
Rather than you're going to be dismissed from the get-go. Based on timing of when we're recording the show, not that long ago, there was a municipal election exercise all through the province. Voter turnout again was abysmal. And I keep waiting for mainstream media to change their narrative so that people will start to understand you've got to get engaged again. And the conversations go through the 4 years, not just come election time. And you're describing on your end, you know, part of the mechanics and the challenges. Here's 500 who phone.
Yeah.
And here's the 15,000 I'm responsible for. And it doesn't matter party affiliation, because that's your role.
That's right.
And to get that across, something's been lost in the general public. Okay, that's who won, that's great. Here's their parameters from their policy. But regardless, they're there for all of you. Matt DeCourcy said almost the same thing a year ago.
Is that right?
Yeah, with how do I reach them? I feel responsible for all these people. Yes, these are the ones who voted for me. And that's the counter to when Democracy Now! And Democracy for Canada stuff, we'll talk about voter turnouts, you know, 100% of the people can vote, 60% bother to vote, and 30% vote for the winners, but they get 100% of the power.
Yeah.
And they see that as a dysfunction.
Well, yes and no. I mean, because you can't. As a politician, you have to reapply for your job every 4 years, mostly. And so you can't be worried about who voted for you. You got to be worried about who's going to vote for you. And the people that voted for you last time, I'm sorry, it's often what's in it for me now. You know, thanks for doing that for me. Now I'm concerned about what you're going to do next. That's done, you know. So politicians that focus too much on a list of things they've accomplished and not a list of things they're going to accomplish or direction they're going in, I think that they're rarely successful. I think you have to focus on the future. And I mean, life is easier if you can just sort of put everyone into a box. But the days of, even in New Brunswick, the days of being red, blue, or another color, those are gone. There are some people that will always be a certain stripe, and you can't move them off that hill. But most voters in New Brunswick are now finding themselves in the band where they're voting everything. They're looking at what people have to say. And most, you know, I'm a political science student, and I've practiced it, and I know the theory, but most people don't know that, right? So they don't know that they're on their right wing or their left wing or whatever that means. They just know these are ideas that are resonating with me. You know, so even within my own party, sometimes people can't tell you what it means to be a conservative. And so, no, it's true. And these are
It's
people that are
true.
very engaged. If I sat, even caucus, I think I wonder sometimes if you sat them all down and say, well, what does it mean to you to be conservative? You'd hear a very wide description of that.
Yep.
And that's healthy. It's very healthy. And so, I mean, part of the leadership process that we're going through is individual candidates are explaining their perspective and some of their policies but we're all inside the same party. So the bandwidth is fairly narrow, actually, because we're all kind of in the same, there's nobody, I mean, there are a few dissenting voices, but generally speaking, everybody falls in a broad stripe.
Yeah.
But people, even the general public, in New Brunswick, it's a very traditional culture. So a lot of people were born and bred of a certain stripe, but that is less and less the case.
Yes.
And so I think as a politician, you have to constantly be appealing to people based on what they want. I mean, that's what you're trying to find out. What do people want, and then you're the one who's leading them in that direction.
So do you think the new organizing principle then might actually be? I'm thinking of millennials. I'm thinking 25 to 40-year-olds, and the fact that it's not organizing itself, meaning general society, organizing itself on the old party line structure, because there's something.
I still think a party system is important, by the way.
Okay.
Well, that's another issue.
But in a sense, because we're on the cusp of a change. The past 10 years, there's been the beginnings of the change. Now we're full bore into the change. Systems are changing left, right, and center. Populations are doubling, and we're more aware of climate change. So that means other systems need to adapt with them. And from that will come the larger social engagement process through political decisions, because that's the ultimate intersection. That's where everything intersects. That's why I asked the difference between being in power and governance, because government at some point is going to slide back to balancing all the parts, rather than, this color won and we're going to go this way for a while. And that severe pendulum swing that happens, and people feel after 20 years we never really got anywhere on poverty, education, economic growth, GDP, all those things. So you're now hinting at there's another thing that's happening that you're picking up that awareness of. And so even within our party, we've got this range. So do you have a sense then what the new guiding principles will be that will lead Conservative Party forward for, it used to be, a old-fashioned, I hate to say it that way, a core set of values, but something new is emerging? Can you frame that for us yet? Because is it too soon yet?
Well, I think it's got to be on core values. I mean, I don't know that those have changed radically.
So can you articulate
well, sure.
them so that...
One of the principles of sort of conservative movement is less government in people's lives. Okay. And with that comes lower taxes, right? So government shouldn't be trying to solve all your problems for you, and also you shouldn't be paying all your money to a government that's trying to solve all your problems. And so that's kind of important. Those two are crucial pieces, and also that's close to that is balancing the budget. So fiscal responsibility, we call it. The sense that you can't be spending more than you're taking in as revenue. So those are kind of pretty classic conservative values. And I also think you get into sort of the social responsibility piece, and that is the reason we do have government is to provide law and order, and also to care for those who need support most. And those are also classic conservative values. I mean, we're the Progressive Conservative Party. That's kind of the progressive piece of it. So those are some pretty core values in the bandwidth. Now there's all kinds of other specific policies that come out of those, but I think those are kind of guiding principles.
Great.
And I think those are sound. I think those are very sound,
Good.
And they'll continue to be the case. And like I say, people articulate it to greater. You don't hear that in a platform.
No.
You hear a number of policies, but what's guiding that is, like I say, generally the sense that people need less government in their lives, that the larger government gets, the harder it is for other individuals and institutions and businesses to do the real work, because it's sucking up the oxygen that they need. So that's kind of where it comes from.
Yeah, but that's so important to share that. So thank you for that, because people get caught in the details. So they'll see a platform, they'll see all the specifics and then chew on it one way or the other.
That's it.
And they won't see where the cohesion or coherence came from,
Yeah.
which are those 4 or 5 core values that will be driving the overall vision.
Yeah.
And
I believe in it. I mean, and I think that it's something that parties and leaders and politicians can lose track of very quickly. I think you always have to have in the back of your head, okay, what are my what are my guiding principles, and then you align the policies. Because it was great. I went to Toronto a few years ago and had the opportunity to see George W. Bush and Bill Clinton on stage together. And it was fascinating, and obviously two very different people from two very different parties. Polar opposites really.
Yep.
And the tone of the discussion was these two guys actually have more in common than you would expect. First of all, they're part of a very small club, the living presidents of past presidents, a small group of people, and they know what it's like to do that job, and very few people do, and that's a defining thing. They both were two-term presidents, so 8 years is a long part of your life. So there's that, but also what they said was, we came to the office of president with an election campaign and platform and all that sort of thing. But once we got into office, we were shaped by the issues of the day. And a great example of that is George W. Bush. When he was elected, a lot of people think a lot of things about George W. Bush, but when he was elected on a classic American isolationist policy. So the idea that the Americans would sort of collapse back into Fortress America, they'd bring the troops back home more or less, and they'd focus on that. And it's the same rhetoric you're hearing from Trump now. I mean, runs through the length of American political thought, is the sense that it's Fortress America, make America strong, all that sort of thing. Let's focus on us at home. And I think, there's a lot to that. There's a lot of good points to that. But then again, then 9/11 happened, and George Bush got drawn into two wars that George Bush never wanted to do. So the point is that you can get elected on a certain set of principles, or really you get elected on a set of policies, not principles, but policies, and those often don't survive the first day or the first month. So but behind those policies, you have to have some guiding principles, and I think that can help leaders and governments move forward if they can to themselves understand where they sit, what their philosophical beliefs are, and they have to apply that to policies. Otherwise, you're always governing sort of. It's like pop-up targets, okay, whack-a-mole, right? Like that's a problem, solve it. That's a problem, solve it. Oh, there's another problem over there, I got to solve it.
And you'll be doing that ad infinitum.
That's it, and so I think it's important to have some guiding principles.
Following that theme and trying to turn it to the future, New Brunswick has a history now since the McKenna era, roughly, that we haven't made any progress. We haven't moved forward. Our GDP tends to be the same. Our population is somewhat stable, even if it's aging, but it's still somewhat stable. For those indicators, those who use those indicators, other people use other indicators like happiness indices and those sorts of, they're starting to wheedle their way into the narrative as well. So, and part of the responsibility for that, some would say, is the dysfunction, they would see it as a dysfunction in the political party process. Because one zeroes the other one out, and they change places, and nothing changes. You know that narrative. I'm sure you've heard it countless times.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who's in power, nothing changes. So here, how do we get past that from your point? Because you're straddling both. You're in the system, and you're also a citizen, and you would want that change to happen for the province. Does that kind of make sense? Like, how do we get over the way we've always done it so that we can actually move forward? Is it clarity of a party's vision and its roots to put forward the platform, and then we actually get over a hump and our GDP grew a little bit, or we recruited or found 10,000 new citizens that came and joined the province, and then our population took that little bump up? How do we bump tourism up a little bit so that helps GDP? So many people say it gets caught up in partisan politics, or it doesn't matter who's in power, they're all the same. And I'd like that narrative to change, which is why I ask, because you'll get the chance to make that narrative change.
Yeah, I think. So, as Churchill said about our system, it's the worst system there is, except for all the others. So the system we have is flawed. You've heard that quote, I'm sure. It's a flawed system, right? It is a flawed system. The system we have is an adversarial system. So we have a number of parties in New Brunswick. Really, no disrespect to the other parties, we really have effectively two governing parties, certainly, and the other parties have big influence, massive influence in public policy, in seat count, all those things. They have a real input, but they haven't governed yet. So we have a two-party system effectively, and it goes back and forth. And if we had a three-party system, let's be frank, it would go back and forth three ways probably. So, having another party isn't a change to the system. That's just an innovation. It's not a change.
Good point.
And I think that with there are other models. There are cooperative models of governance. If you look at the territories in Canada, they're nonpartisan. They govern by council, but those are more they are frankly more like municipal governments than they are like provincial or federal governments. Yeah, they're
group of independents.
It's a small, I'm not trying to underestimate the challenges they face because they are enormous, but it's a small group of people governing a relatively small budget with and a small population, much smaller than even ours. Right. So, there are other models, but I think that the models that are more, as dysfunctional as our system is, it is successful. It's got us this far, and I've served around the world, and I'll tell you, not everyone's lucky enough to have our dysfunctional system. And there's lots of countries in the world that we would like to move to what I consider an acceptable level of dysfunction. And if they were doing as badly as we are, they'd be in great shape.
Wouldn't it be nice to have our general population be grateful for the system we have? Because I understand the point you're getting to about dysfunctional system, but I keep thinking, but it's functional. It's got us this far. Yeah. And others would love to have what we have.
Absolutely. So for all of its blemishes, it's actually a pretty good system. Yeah. There's no doubt there's room for improvement, for sure. Obviously, cooperation is a better model than competition, but competition is a pretty good model, and let's not forget that. And it goes back to Darwin. It's kind of the state of nature. We live in a competitive world, and politics arguably are the competition over scarce resources. We have a finite amount of everything: time, money, resources, and it's how those are distributed in our society. That's the discourse that we're in, and so I don't think that goes away. I think there are ways to cooperate. And we've seen some of those innovations to our system that have permitted different kinds of discourse. I think that technology now is moving us in a direction where soon we may be able to be more directly democratic. I mean, the system we have is we elect our officials to go and represent us, and that was done at a time when you couldn't drive to Fredericton and state your case. Yep. But now you don't need to drive to Fredericton, you could text it on your phone. So, and like I said, I'm not sure that we should govern by text message, but there are ways, there are now innovative ways to engage people, and you can engage individuals. My concern with that is, as I said, there's the other trend that we're seeing is that there are small groups that, because people are so disengaged, they wield inordinate power. So a small group that's well organized can move public policy for better or for worse in a very dramatic way. So we have to balance against that, because that's not democratic either. So the underlying question in all this, and I'm sure it's the question on Matt's mind too, like, how do you engage people? How do you better engage people? How do you get their interest? And I know through this process, frankly, it's summer. It's been a long winter, we had a rainy spring, and now it's summer, and people's minds are on getting the dock in and getting the boat out and making sure the dog is walked. And that's where people's minds are right now. Yeah. There's a small subset of people that are rabid about politics, and they're very interested in what's happening, and everybody else is out getting a tan and having a beer on the deck, And so how do you get through that? And also, I would say, that's a great mark of success. Yeah. The best government is the kind of government you don't even know or care about. That's just doing what it needs to do in the background, and it's not engaging you. And I think that when what we're seeing, it's interesting to watch, because right now we're seeing a government that is kind of hitting people's hot buttons by mistake, it seems. And I think the recent issue of the TAB, the tuition benefit, that has disenfranchised a whole bunch of people and benefited a small group, a small but needy group, but has disenfranchised a lot of people, has once again pushed a hot button. People that were quite happy to sit on their deck and get a tan are now all of a sudden out thousands of dollars. And money that they'd counted on, money that they need to further their education and to better their families. And so when it impacts on you, then you wake up and you say, okay, now I'm engaged. And that seems to be, if you look at New Brunswick politics, we say often that it's single issue politics. But it's often driven by issues that really single issues that really end up resonating with individuals and affect their lives. So the government can go on doing what it's doing, but when it pops its head above the radar with a bad policy that impacts people in a negative way, you're going to hear about it. NB Power is an example of that. Everybody gets an NB Power bill, and people reacted. Yeah. Car insurance is another one. I mean, when car insurance went up, it affects everyone in the province. They notice it. And similarly with this tuition, wow, like that really affects a large group of people. Yeah. And we're feeling it.
Great. This is a great place to pause.
Okay, good.
Thank you. That was good. Thanks, we'll be right back with, you're going to have a couple of community announcements. We'll be back in a few moments. Thank you. And we're back with Brian Macdonald, MLA and candidate for the leadership of the Provincial Progressive Conservative Party. Thanks again for taking the time.
Thanks, Dennis. Great to be here.
So when we broke for break, we talked a little bit about how to get some people engaged, better conversation around issues. And I wanted to wander into a little bit, maybe some specifics, because that'll give you some space to talk about hot issues. You were talking about taking away or changing the tuition rebate for students and how it kind of gave some something and took something away from others, which creates that sense of imbalance in a community. And of course they rise up to it because you've done something I don't like, so we're coming at you. We've got a lot of key, especially impact on economic topics that'll have to be settled in the next couple of years, whether it's energy east or some mining issues, the loss of the mine in the Sussex area because potash market has changed. Do you want to wander into what you see as where we should go in the next couple of years to get New Brunswick humming on those economic indicators?
Yeah, so I campaigned already on a pretty clear platform of responsible resource development. So I fully believe in that, and I think that the pipeline is essential to the future of New Brunswick because it's essential to the future of the refinery in St. John. And it will provide both a consistent supply of Canadian ethical oil to the refinery in St. John, and also provide some great opportunities for the Port of St. John. And what's good for St. John is good for New Brunswick. So I believe in that stuff. But I also think one of the things we really need to do better is focus on what we do well here in New Brunswick and reinforce those strengths. And my concern with the increased taxation that we've seen in the province is we're punishing the people that live here. We're turning around to the businesses and individuals that live here and say, you need to, our costs are going up, you need to take more of the burden, and we're just pushing that burden onto them. And what that means is not only are people struggling under the weight of that, but it means our businesses can't grow and be competitive. And what we need fundamentally in this province is an atmosphere, an environment that encourages our business to be competitive, because we're well situated. We have great access to the American market. We now have a trade deal with Europe that's unprecedented. There's opportunity in New Brunswick. Mm-hmm. And we do some things very, very well. Mm-hmm. So we need to do those things better. We need to find ways of adding value to the things that we do, and we need to find markets to export them to. And mostly we have to take the burden off the businesses so that they can rise to the challenge. Because it is a global market. Listen, Trump may do something different in the States, and we may go back to a different era. Europe is doing its own thing with Brexit, and there's other forces at work. But I think the future is free trade, is freer trade, less barriers. That's the way the world's been moving for a long time, and we need to take advantage of that. But what it means is we have to be competitive on the world market. If we want to sell our products have to be competitive. And the increases that we've seen in taxation, payroll taxes, these sorts of things have made our businesses struggle here. So I appreciate that we have to attract some business from outside, but I look at it like the cell phone deal. I actually was just getting my cell phone done. And if you want to buy a new cell phone, you get a great deal. But if you're an existing customer, you don't get that deal. And that's what we're doing to New Brunswickers. We'll attract other businesses and we'll give them all these things. And what would happen to our existing businesses if we could find ways of giving them those safe benefits? Or even not worry about that and just take the burden of taxation off them so they can be competitive with other jurisdictions, because we've got the most taxed jurisdiction in North America. So how do we expect those businesses to be competitive? It's got to come from somewhere.
So in that spirit of freer trade, more mobility, recent story was beer going over the border, interprovincial trade barriers. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think interprovincial trade barriers are completely ridiculous. We need to move away from that. I think that comes from if we can have free trade with the United States and Mexico and Europe and Asia, why can't we have free trade amongst our provinces? It's completely ridiculous. And I know that, alcohol is a specific product, and it's a product over which the government has complete monopoly. Yeah. And in my opinion, the government's using the laws of the province to protect a commercial monopoly. We wouldn't let any other business do that. We wouldn't say to any other business, hey, you can't export your product. You can't move it across the borders. That's just crazy. So I don't think we should be in that business.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting challenge then to find where the mesh is to allow that mobility.
Well, it's mobile already. That's the thing. It's already happening, and it'd be interesting to have ANBL in here because I know they're feeling the heat. But they could draw a line. You could take the map of New Brunswick, and they will draw a line And on one side of the line is people that go to Quebec to get their beer. And the higher the price goes, the more that line moves south, effectively. So, you know, I'm not trying to run A and BL. It should be run separately, but by the same token, you shouldn't take the laws of the state to reinforce a business interest, and that's effectively what's happening here.
And we can use that as a current example, but there's a principle behind the example. Media could have just as easily focused on those people who go over the border to buy their groceries.
Yes, that's right.
Going over to Holton, Maine, or going over to different border crossings to do that. So more important is the principle of buying home, buying local. One of the past guests were Ted Wiggins and Amanda Wildman from the Farmers Union in New Brunswick. Amanda does an excellent job mapping out if New Brunswickers just spent $28 a month more on buying produce locally, it would have an impact of $100 million for farmers in New Brunswick, right?
Amazing.
She got it down to a wonderful soundbite. Now she's trying to get it out to people. So it's fascinating how we want to make the province better. We've got all the resources to do it, but we don't have the behavior pattern yet to do it. And politics can do a lot to help shift that behavior pattern.
I think so. I mean, people want to see some leadership on these issues, and you know, as a conservative, these are the kind of issues we need to embrace, because to me, those are, you know, we talked about fundamental principles before, and these reinforce the fundamental principles. And to me, farmers are the ultimate entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. You know, they're the original entrepreneur. And if you look over at Cole St. Anne, not far from where we are right now, they have a successful program of integrating local food in their cafeteria, and it's great. And I'm sure there's additional cost, but there's also health benefits. So, you know, we have a lot of provincial institutions. I'd love to see some programs that integrate local food better into those institutions. We have to give the resources to make it happen.
What was your take on when David Kuhn, the Green Party MLA, introduced or tried to introduce the food security legislation? Was it premature, or was it the right spot, right time, but politics get in the way? But because at some point we'll need some sort of officially sanctioned strategy on local food security.
Yeah, I mean, I have great respect for David and the work he does, and he works with a good team of volunteers that help him move the legislation along. Yeah. You know, I do believe we need to do what we can to support our local farmers and fishermen and local industry, and that's something that's important. And I think that you know, there were parts of that legislation I was a little concerned about, maybe leaning a little too far, but okay. I think the principle of it is good, and you know, we've seen successive governments talk about buying local, and that's good, but I think we need to see more of that in our institutions.
Yeah, and there was, I think in the recent media, there's, because it's spring or late spring, the Buy Local campaign is being rolled out again.
It's a great campaign. Yeah. It's a great campaign. And I think, I mean, what you're pointing to, Dennis, is interesting because, you know, I say, I'm a little government guy, and here I am saying it should be in our institutions. And I think it should, but the people have to lead it. Yes. And that's the great thing about democracy is if the people bought more, you know, that's the farmers are saying it really should be the people that do it, you know, because the people are buying more than the institutions are, and that's where the burden should be. So if people value this, and there's an education piece to that for sure. Yeah. If people only understood the value to their local economy from buying local, they would probably make the investment. So that, you know, it's got to be led on the ground.
Recalling a bit of that conversation with Ted and Amanda, they also talked about the challenges for local produce to make it onto the store shelves of the big producers, because the buying decisions are made in Toronto.
And that's where I think...
So can legislation come in to help nudge that a bit, or is that too much government intrusion?
You know, back to the binding principles, my instinct is it's too much government intrusion. I think that the more you regulate things, actually you make the problem worse. Yeah. You want to encourage free flow of ideas and money and resources. That's what you want to do. The more you regulate it, you're boxing things in. But I would say that's where the government can take a lead. You're right. Farmers, in order to sell into the supply chains that we have, the national supply chains, you know, that we have a few companies that kind of rule the groceries market, they've got to be able to provide consistency over time at a certain volume.
Yes.
And local farmers have trouble doing that.
Yes.
And what we've seen, which is great in New Brunswick, is a resurgence of young local farmers. People are actually going back to the land as entrepreneurs, and that's wonderful to see, because we have lots of farms that are going in the other direction. So we want to encourage these people, but they can't produce at the level and quality, and well, it's not a question of quality, but the level and consistency that the supply chain requires. So I think that's where the government could help, maybe by buying up some of that produce. And, you know, Locally, we've got Levi Lawrence, who's a great leader in this field. He's expanded his operations, which is a great story.
Yeah.
But that's still a relatively small market.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe the government institutions can come along a little bit and help.
that way.
But the problem is we've squeezed, if you look at nursing homes, I think the daily food allowances, it's well under $10 a day. I think it's in the range of $7.50 or something. It's just shocking.
Yep.
Excuse me. So we have to move that bar a little because you're not going to get local produce for $10 a day. That's not going to happen. And can we afford, can we as a province afford that? And like I say, there are some benefits to it. There's benefits to the local agricultural network, but it's also some health benefits too.
Big health benefits. I'd like to wander back into the Energy East pipeline thing.
Sure.
Just because it's kind of hot and it's not gone away, and it probably won't go away for another year or so. And it's good to go into the hot areas sometimes because that's where good discussion can happen. So there's some that would say from their research that it won't generate many jobs, and they forever, rightly or wrongly, they're very focused on the environmental impacts. And we'll cite across North America the number of spills from pipelines. One pipeline industry will insist it's safe, they got the latest technology, et cetera. And then there'll be another story pop up out of the States or out of Canada somewhere where a leak occurred and technology didn't save the day and they didn't find it for 2 days, 3 days. And so regardless of those details, but will it really create, can you explain to us why you think it really will create jobs? And what kind of jobs, and then will it have, because then that's the balance to the risk, because you talked about the balance between mitigating risk and providing security, employment security.
Yeah. So I don't see I've never seen the pipeline as a huge job generator, and I'm pretty clear about that on the record. What it does is it maintains the future of the refinery in St. John.
Good point.
So it's not so much job creation as job preservation. That's the first thing. There are some. There'll be jobs building the pipeline, but those are transient.
Yeah.
They're still good. That's going to be economic activity in rural areas of the province. That's what we need.
2 or 3 years. Yeah.
That's it. 2 or 3 years, short duration, but still important. So there's that. But that's transient. There are some jobs maintaining the pipeline, but it's not. It's not a significant
120
number.
to 200 max.
That's right. Which, once again, it's not nothing. That's still important. That's good, but it's not. It's not a huge number. So it's about maintaining the refinery. It's also, I think that the refinery is in the order of 30% of the volume that comes through that pipeline. So the other 70% is available for shipping through the Port of St. John. And so, and there's a potential to work in Beldoon as well, which would be great. Because there's that's where we need the economic activity is in that area, and it's a great port and it has access to great markets. So between Beldoon potentially and certainly St. John, that will create jobs and secure the future of that port. So there's some job creation happening there. Mm-hmm. Also, what we see when that kind of economic activity happens, there's all kinds of ancillary jobs that happen. So there's lawyers and doctors and professionals and engineers all around the province, real estate agents and corner stores that are all now doing a little bit more business. Okay. So that has that's and I think our chief economist, the provincial economist, can numerize that for you. He can tell you how many spin-off jobs. So there's some of that. And there's some wealth transfer that happens as well, because that money is flowing through, that oil, that money is flowing through our part of the world. There's some wealth transfer that comes for that. So those are all good spin-off things.
Good.
I think it's also important to remember that we're part of a nation, Canada, and that the challenge that Alberta oil faces is that it's landlocked. Mm-hmm. And so when that oil can reach salt water, the minute it hits salt water, it's floated on the international economy, and it achieves market rates. So I think there's a discount of 20 to 40%, I think, on oil that's landlocked in Alberta. And when it gets to salt water, it's now on the international market, and we get more value for our oil. So it's not our oil. We're not getting that benefit, but that benefit's going back to Alberta, and Alberta, through the transfer payments, shares the wealth. And so the fact that, and also, nationally, we get a cut of that. The government of Canada gets a royalty from that oil, so that benefits the country, and what benefits the country benefits New Brunswick. So yes, certainly maintenance of an incredibly important part of our economy, which is the refinery in St. John and all the things that surround that. The jobs that come from the creation and maintenance of the pipeline, that's important. The jobs that come to the Port of St. John and potentially Beldoon, those are very important. And also the wealth creation in our country and the potential wealth transfer that comes with that. So those are all good things. No doubt it's an industrial activity. And industrial activity, in fact, most human activities have an environmental impact. And you're right, it's got about balancing that. To my mind, industrial activities, there are a lot of people that want to shut down industrial activity, but that is part of our economy. It's an important part of our economy. And I think that you can mitigate the risks.
And it's transitions. It's a good point for a shift in the discussion, because how long will that industrial model sustain New Brunswick, or where's the phase to another thing, so that 2050 or 2080 from now, New Brunswick started to do the things it needed to do is this process, whether it's oil-based economy, finds another way and another economy starts to come in, or maybe there's more of a balance. New federal legislation on carbon footprint and carbon taxes, that'll have an impact on a little place. And then I wanted to sneak in another element, because maybe it's the offset. Past guest on the show, Pat McCarthy from Recycle NB. If he were here right now, he'd be so animated, I think, to speak for him about the job opportunities that would come if the three cities would work together in coordination with the provincial government on all what he saw were huge opportunities for recycling of 4 or 5 very specific areas. But it needed some leadership and it needed some cooperation. So from glass, because of the same things you said about oil, to create a production center, but the access to port, which then gets you on an international market, which has all kinds of potential for New Brunswick. Is that anywhere on your radar? That, the oil discussion was very good, but the offset for that would be maybe a high footprint for recycling on certain things, because we've got some of the infrastructure almost in place. Now we need the cooperation.
Yeah, I think that you have to have a business mind when you look at these things, and we have to be sure that it's a sustainable business model. I think that's important. So I haven't looked specifically at that recycling thing. I know that there are local entrepreneurs in Fredericton that are developing a process of unvulcanizing rubber, so taking tires and reducing them back to their component materials. And with that comes great advantage, right? We don't have a way to recycle tires that's really viable. But there are methods you can grind them up and all these sorts of things. You can reuse them, but to break a tire down into the rubber and the carbon and other pieces, again, is an incredible opportunity, and that's a viable economic model. You could make money doing it. Mm-hmm. Other types of recycling often are loss leaders, right? So it's an important process for the environment. It's an important thing we do, and we say, okay, we're willing to pay for that to be returned to a usable state. But let's not confuse that with a business, right? So that's not actually economic growth. Mm-hmm. It costs you. It's a cost. So you have to identify it. So if what he's proposing is something that can actually generate revenue,
it is a business model. It's a revenue generator.
Yeah, and so sometimes those things, and it's interesting that you posit it in conjunction with another industrial activity, because that's actually a really good way to look at it. And that's a good model. You talked earlier about how do you engage and how do you, politics is the art of compromise. Mm. And so, maybe that's what you do to get people to buy into an industrial activity. You offer them a recycling activity that says, okay, I'm not a fan of carbon tax, but that's kind of the thinking behind it, is that you're offsetting one thing with another. Yeah. And I think in this case, that's something that should be explored. But I want to be clear, if it's a business and requires an investment and will generate revenue, that's one thing. If it's a cost, we have to identify it as a cost, because often what happens is people confuse those things. Yes. And they paint a loss leader or a cost as some kind of economic activity. It's not. Yep. Yep. Yeah, it'll create jobs. If you pay for jobs, you can create them. The question is if the jobs that you're creating have to generate some additional revenue. If that's happening, it's not just paying for a job, it's stimulating the economy. Otherwise, it's a loss leader. Yeah,
good point. And good clarity, too.
Thanks.
Tied to, shifted a little bit, we probably have 10 or 15 minutes left, I think, probably 10. Oh, maybe just down to 2. I wanted to slide into the health thing. So every year, when the budget comes down from provincial government, the biggest slice of it is healthcare.
Half, almost.
Yeah. Do you have any short-term thoughts, and then we can slide to a wrap-up?
Yeah, I think, as I said at the beginning, this province is great because we can implement change pretty rapidly. It's small enough that we can get things done. And I'm excited about the opportunities in healthcare. I'm sure John McGarry would hear, he would say similar things, I hope. We have we have the infrastructure we need in healthcare. It
Yes.
needs to be revitalized, but we've got a lot of infrastructure. I think that some of the opportunities that are coming forward are a better mix of healthcare professionals. So we have a system that at its core is doctor-based, and that's always going to be the case. But there are a lot of medical professionals, healthcare professionals out there, pharmacists, opticians, nurse and various
nurse
people,
practitioners,
and
extramural
others,
system.
all of those people on that spectrum that could be better employed. And they can be employed because you want everyone to sort of do the job to the top end of their training. And I think often we employ physicians to do things they don't need to be doing.
Right.
And I think that, some of them are traditional and used to that model, but other physicians want to be on the cutting edge of their practice. And so if we get a better mix, we allow each part of the system to do what it's best at, and that frees the other parts up to do what they're better at. And along with that can come some cost savings. So that's the first thing I think that's important. And also we have a network of nursing homes out there that we need to regard less as nursing homes and more as centers of excellence for care in the community. And I think that that's an opportunity.
It sounds subtle, but it's so important, the shift you just made from nursing homes and the connotation or the feeling it generates compared to centers of excellence for care.
Yeah.
There's another major narrative in New Brunswick is aging population. Media tends to portray it in a negative way as a tsunami of seniors. I think the intent is we need to adapt and figure out how we're going to deal with it. But the reality is an awful lot of seniors are very fit
Yes.
and very engaged and very active and looking for a place to land, not unlike the 20 to 35-year-olds who are very fit, very engaged, and looking for a place to land.
Yeah, and there's a myth out there, I think, that seniors cost more in terms of healthcare. You know what? Healthy people don't cost a lot of healthcare. Sick people cost healthcare. And so if you can keep your people healthy,
Yes.
and aging and illness are not, I mean, they're not unrelated, but they're not necessarily related. And there's a lot, and as you say, there are a lot of healthy, fit people that are seniors out there that have a lot to offer and aren't a big burden on the system,
Yeah.
especially a system that is now largely based on pharmaceutical care.
Yep.
And a lot of people can control their illness with pharmaceuticals, and they're not a burden on the system.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it's I met the other day with John Macdonald. He's been a real pioneer in this field, and I think that there's an opportunity again for New Brunswick to embrace our seniors. Turn the nursing homes inside out, so they're offering care into the communities, and they're offering walk-in clinics that better serve the needs of people and keep people in their homes as long as possible. And also, it gives that opportunity for more seniors to potentially come here. And
Yep.
the challenge I have with that, I think that, John McLaughlin, have we got a minute?
Yeah, keep going.
So John McLaughlin talks a lot about bringing seniors to the province and urbanizing them, and I think that's a great theme. We do have to remember that seniors tend to follow their grandchildren, right? They want to be where their grandchildren are, and their
Yes.
grandchildren are where there's employment,
Yes.
because it's the parents that need to be employed. And that's the crucial nexus. You've got to create jobs, and it comes back to my original point.
Yeah.
And I don't believe the government creates jobs. The government has got to create the conditions
Yes.
where the businesses that exist in this province can grow and prosper to create jobs. So yeah, we can bring grandparents here because they want to be with their grandchildren, and their grandparents are here. The grandchildren are here because their parents are happy and working. That's what I want to see.
Awesome.
Great.
We need to wrap up. 2 minutes. What would you like to end letting our audience know?
Well, like I say, I think that there's been a lot of negative thought around the province. We have some problems. We certainly do. I think there's great potential here. We do have a province that's rich in resources. Traditional sectors are actually, although they have been in decline, there's what's left is quite vibrant in a lot of ways. And we need to reinforce what we do well in this province and find better ways of reducing the burden that government puts on our businesses through taxation. Allow those businesses to flourish and help them find markets around the world. And that, I think, will bring increased prosperity here and help us solve a lot of our problems.
Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your heart and passions. It's great.
Pleasure, Dennis. Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Excellent.
Thank you for watching. As always, you can catch the Dennis Report on my website channel, which is dennisatchison.com. Thank you again. Be good, have fun, and love each other.